I heard the sentence before I even understood I was meant to hear it. She's old. She won't understand. The words came from behind the kitchen doorway, low, careless, said with the same tone people use when talking about a broken chair or a forgotten umbrella. And for a moment I simply froze, standing there with the dish towel in my hand, feeling the world shift a little under my feet. At 76, you'd think I'd be used to being spoken about as if I weren't in the room. But it still stings, that quiet dismissal, that little push into invisibility. My daughter-in-law Naomi had never bothered to soften her voice when she talked about me. My son, Thomas, usually tried to muffle it, but today he didn't. They were talking freely, thinking I was too far away to hear or too slow to notice. She won't understand. Meaning, I wouldn't notice, I wouldn't question, I wouldn't matter. I stood still long enough to feel my heartbeat slow into something heavy. I wiped my hands, folded the towel, and made myself walk into the living room as if the sentence hadn't slipped under my ribs like a thin, cold knife. Naomi was leaning over her phone, scrolling through photos of outfits, elegant dresses, gold accents, high heels. Thomas was smoothing the collar of his shirt, the way he always did before something important. "You two are going out tonight?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, even warm. "At my age, you learn to speak without letting anything spill." They both looked up, too quickly, like children caught in a lie. Naomi smiled with the sort of smile people give to strangers they don't want to offend. Thomas's eyes darted to hers, waiting for her to take the lead. "Oh," she said lightly. "It's just a small dinner. Nothing special." My boy didn't correct her, not even a flicker of truth in his eyes. I watched the way his jaw tightened. Guilt always sat there, just beneath the skin. I'd learned that from raising him. "I see," I murmured. For a moment, neither of them met my gaze. They were dressed too well for nothing special. Thomas kept checking his watch. Naomi kept adjusting her hair. And they didn't ask if I wanted to join them, not even out of politeness. That told me everything. I walked back to my small corner of the kitchen, the corner where my old kettle hummed on the stove, where the light was soft and familiar. Things here understood me, even if my own family didn't. I tried to make myself busy, as I always did. I arranged the sugar jar, straightened the napkins, adjusted the small ceramic plate I'd bought years ago at a thrift shop. A pointless ritual, but rhythm quiets pain. Then I heard Naomi's voice again, this time sharper, whispering, but not quietly enough. "It's better if she doesn't come. She'd feel out of place. She never knows how to behave at these things." Thomas didn't protest. He just exhaled through his nose, impatient, embarrassed. Embarrassed of me. It shouldn't have hurt as much as it did. But I suppose there's no age where a mother stops hoping her child will be proud of her. When they finally left, the door shutting with a neat click, I stood in the empty hallway for a long time. Their laughter drifted from the porch, fading with the sound of their car pulling away. My house felt colder without a single window open. I walked to the mirror in the hallway, looked at myself, gray hair pulled back simply, soft lines around my eyes. A woman who had worked hard her entire life, raised a son alone after her husband died, paid every bill Thomas couldn't, held this family together through more storms than they ever knew. And yet, according to them, I wouldn't understand. But I did. I understood more than they thought. Enough to know that tonight wasn't nothing special. Enough to know I was never meant to be part of it. And enough, far more than enough, to freeze their account before breakfast. I spent the first hour after they left walking through rooms that suddenly felt too large, as if the walls had quietly shifted farther apart. The silence in the house had weight to it, a kind of heaviness that settled on my shoulders, the way grief used to. I made myself a cup of tea I barely tasted and sat by the window, watching the street where nothing much ever changed. At this age, familiarity is supposed to soothe. But that night, it only reminded me of how small my world had become. Their world, meanwhile, seemed to be expanding. New restaurants, new friends, new photographs of events I never heard about until after they happened. Sometimes I'd stumble upon pictures Naomi posted online, formal dinners, expensive places, elegant plates, and Thomas, always beside her, looking like the sort of man who didn't want his mother anywhere near that shining version of his life. I would look at those photos and think quietly, when did I become an extra in a story I helped build? On the mantel above the fireplace stood photographs of my husband, Daniel. I reached for one without thinking. The one where he stood in front of our first little house, hair ruffled, smiling at me instead of the camera. He'd been gone for 11 years now, but I still caught myself moving through the house as if leaving space for him. "You'd know what to say," I whispered to the glass. Daniel had never allowed anyone to talk down to me, not even our own son. But life without him had turned me softer, quieter. Too quiet, perhaps. I put the photo back in its spot and walked toward the spare bedroom, the one Thomas and Naomi used on the rare occasions they stayed over, back in the days when visits weren't just about what they needed. I opened the dresser drawer inside. It still held the blanket I'd knit for them as a housewarming gift 12 years ago. They said it didn't match the decor and left it here. For when we visit, they said. They never took it home, and I never asked why. Now I realized I hadn't asked many things. In the hallway closet were boxes I hadn't opened in years. I dragged them out one by one, sitting on the floor because my knees complained, and I didn't want to argue with them. Inside, the boxes were snapshots of a life lived with full devotion, handmade birthday cards from Thomas when he was a boy, the receipts from his college tuition I'd covered when he struggled, the invoice for his first car insurance, which I paid because he'd just moved in with Naomi, and they were tight on money. Everywhere I looked, I saw proof of a woman who had given and given and given. The strange thing about generosity is how quietly it becomes expected, how naturally people begin to lean, then lean harder, until they no longer realize they're leaning at all. And you, old fool, you let them, because love is a soft and stubborn thing. When I opened the last box, I found the small wooden jewelry case Daniel had given me for our 20th anniversary. Inside it were the deed papers to the little cabin we used to rent by the lake each summer, a cabin I sold to help Thomas revive a small business that failed 6 months later. He'd barely remembered to thank me. Sitting there on the floor, I realized how long I'd let the same story repeat itself. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, but I didn't move. I knew it wouldn't be Thomas checking on me. It never was. It would be some automated message or a reminder I'd set for myself months ago. No one was thinking of me tonight. It was strange how betrayal doesn't always roar. Sometimes it comes in soft steps, in exclusions dressed as oversights, in quiet moments like this one, when you realize you've been erased from the table you once set. I walked back to the window, watching the street lamp flicker on. The house across the road glowed with warm light. The neighbors had guests, laughter drifting through their open door. I stood there for a long time, letting the sound settle into the emptiness of my home. By the time I closed the curtains, something inside me had shifted. A small, steady flame had lit itself. Nothing dramatic, just a certainty. I wasn't angry, not yet. Anger is loud, and what I felt was quiet. Quieter than breath, but firm, solid. Let them have their night. Let them sit around their elegant table without me. Let them pretend I wouldn't understand. I understood perfectly. And in the morning, when I rose with the first light, as I always did, I knew I would no longer be the woman they expected me to be. Not ever again. By morning, the house felt different. Not lighter, not heavier, just honest. As if the walls finally stopped pretending. I moved slowly through the kitchen, the way I always did, my joints stiff from the cold night. The kettle whistled its thin little song, and I brewed myself weak tea, the kind Daniel used to tease me for drinking. Hot water with ambition, he called it. I smiled at the memory, then let the smile fade. Today wasn't a day for soft thoughts. I carried my tea to the dining table, clearing a small space among the things I'd pulled out the night before. Old receipts, notes, worn envelopes, all jumbled reminders of years spent plugging holes in other people's lives. I pressed my fingers to the table's wooden edge, feeling its familiar grooves. Then I inhaled and began sorting. The first envelope I opened held the bill from Thomas's car accident 15 years ago. He'd hit a mailbox while driving too fast in the rain. The insurance premium went up, and I paid the difference for 2 years because money was tight. I remember how Naomi thanked me then, thin, polite, already distant. That was before she started calling my help Mom's contribution, as if it were a duty, not a gift. Next, a stack of folded documents, tuition fees for his second degree. That was the year he'd said, "Mom, I swear this will change everything for us." And I believed him. I always believed him. There were receipts from repairs on their old house, roofing, plumbing, broken windows after a storm. "We'll pay you back," they promised. The phrase had repeated so often, I could almost hear it echoing from the papers. Not once had they tried. I pushed them all aside and reached for a thicker manila folder, one I hadn't opened in years. Inside were bank statements with regular transfers to Thomas's account, some large, some small, all withdrawn from the savings Daniel and I built over 40 years. Looking at those pages, I could almost hear Daniel's voice in my ear. "Be careful, Maggie. Don't give away more than you can live without." But grief makes you reckless sometimes. Loneliness, even more so. One document caught my eye. An old loan agreement Thomas drafted when he'd tried to start a landscaping business. I had lent him a substantial sum, enough to buy equipment and lease a small lot. He abandoned the business 4 months later when he got a better job offer. The paper still had my signature, neat and hopeful. It hurt to look at it. I folded it back into the folder, closing it gently as if it were something fragile. I moved on to the receipts from vacations I'd paid for. A family trip, they'd insisted, but I was always the one who stayed home to watch their dog. I don't know why I thought they'd invite me along. It was foolish. But the foolishness was mine, and I could own that. When I opened a small tin box, a familiar smell rose from it. Lavender soap. Inside were old birthday cards from my grandchildren. Their handwriting changed over the years, growing steadier. Lily's cards always had a personal note, something she wrote herself. The others were clearly chosen by Naomi, signed quickly, without thought. I held Lily's most recent card for a moment, my chest tightening around the memory of her hug last week, the only one in the family who truly saw me. I set the cards aside, careful not to bend the corners. Then came the document I dreaded most. The financial authorization form I'd signed 6 years ago, giving Thomas access to my account in case something happened to me. Naomi had insisted it was safer that way. "You're getting older, Mom," she'd said. "It's better if we can manage things for you." I had agreed, not because I trusted her reasons, but because I'd been tired. Tired in the quiet, heavy way that makes you give up small pieces of yourself until suddenly you have none left to offer. Now, reading my own signature, I felt an unexpected steadiness settle in my chest. "Not anymore," I whispered. My voice didn't tremble. I continued sorting through the drawers in my study, found statements for the automatic payments I'd set up for their house, mortgage contributions, utility bills covered, just until they get back on their feet. They'd been getting back on their feet for over a decade. Then came a thin plastic folder I hadn't seen since Daniel's funeral. Inside were the notes from the meeting with our attorney back then. I saw a reminder in Daniel's handwriting. "Protect Maggie first." He'd underlined it twice. My breath caught in my throat. I traced the ink with the tip of my finger, feeling something tighten, then loosen inside me. For the first time in a long while, I felt Daniel's presence in the room, not as memory, but as clarity. I gathered all the papers into tidy piles, each one a quiet testament to years of unquestioned giving, years of being the support beam for people who'd forgotten who built the house. By the time the clock struck 9, the sun had risen fully. Light filled the room, falling over the table, over the papers, over my hands. I wasn't confused. I wasn't fragile. And I certainly wasn't someone who wouldn't understand. I understood perfectly. And the day was just beginning. By afternoon, the house no longer felt like a quiet refuge. It felt like a witness. Every room seemed to hold its breath, listening, as if it knew something was about to shift. I tried to move through my day as usual: laundry, watering the plants, folding linens that barely got used anymore. But everything I touched felt different, as though my hands themselves understood what my mind had only begun to accept. It was nearly 3 o'clock when my phone buzzed with a message. Not from Thomas or Naomi, of course not. It was from Lily. "Grandma, are you home? Can I stop by?" My chest relaxed a little. She was the only one whose messages I didn't brace myself for. I told her yes, and 15 minutes later, I heard the familiar quick steps up my porch stairs. Light, lively, unburdened by the cynicism her parents wore like coats. When she stepped inside, her face was flushed from the cold, her brown hair tucked behind her ears in that absent-minded way she'd had since she was a child. She gave me a warm hug, not rushed, not obligatory, but sincere. The kind of embrace that makes you forget you ever felt invisible. "Grandma," she said, pulling back to look at me. "How are you feeling today?" I smiled. "I've had quieter days." She frowned at that, not dramatically, just with that gentle intuition she'd always possessed. She sat at the table, glanced at the piles of documents neatly stacked by the lamp. "What are all those papers?" she asked softly. "Oh, just old things," I said. "Sorting through the past." She nodded, but her eyes lingered on the folders. She wasn't one to pry, not into things that hurt. Instead, she folded her hands on the table, looking as if she were gathering courage. "Grandma, can I ask you something? And you have to promise not to get upset." There it was, the hesitation, the sign that she was holding something heavy. I placed my hand over hers. "Ask me, dear." She inhaled a little too sharply. "Did my mom and dad? Did they invite you to the dinner last night?" The question was a knife, but not because it cut, because it confirmed what she already knew. I didn't answer at first. I didn't want to lie, but I also didn't want to load her with the weight her parents had given me. yet she looked at me with those clear, earnest eyes. And I understood something. Lily wasn't a child anymore. And pretending wasn't kindness, not to her, not to myself. No, I said finally. They didn't. Her face crumpled, not in the dramatic way young people sometimes do, but in a quiet, devastated way that made her look much older than her 20 years. But why? She whispered. Why wouldn't they want you there? I could have told her everything. How Naomi said I wouldn't understand. How Thomas stayed silent. How they dressed in their best clothes and laughed as they walked out the door, leaving me behind like an afterthought. But I have never believed in burdening the only person who still loves you. It doesn't matter, I said gently. They made their choice, and I made mine. Lily shook her head. It does matter. Her voice was trembling. Grandma, I don't understand how they can treat you like this. You've done everything for them. I wanted to tell her she didn't know the half of it, but she was already hurting, and I had no desire to add more weight to her shoulders. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. I didn't want to go last night, she admitted. I told them it felt wrong that you weren't invited. Dad told me not to start drama. Her fingers curled around the edge of the table, knuckles white. Mom said you wouldn't fit in with their friends anyway. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Not because of the words, I had already accepted their truth, but because of the look on Lily's face. She seemed ashamed, guilty for something that wasn't hers to carry. I reached out, cupping her cheek with my palm. None of this is your fault, and you mustn't let it become your burden. But Grandma, she whispered, I'm so tired of how they treat you. I've tried talking to them, but they don't listen. They don't want to change. I nodded slowly. Then we don't ask them to change. We change what we allow. She blinked, as if those words startled her. What do you mean? I looked at the neat stacks of documents on the table. I mean, my dear, that love isn't a debt. And debts, well, they can be closed. Lily followed my gaze. I could see understanding dawning on her face, a realization she both feared and respected. You're planning something, she whispered. I'm planning, I said softly, to stop letting myself be treated as if I don't matter. She took my hand, squeezing it firmly. Then I'm with you. It was strange, how in that moment, the room no longer felt empty. For years I'd been giving pieces of myself to people who never noticed when those pieces were gone. And yet here, with this one girl, I felt whole. When Lily finally left, her hug lingered on my shoulders long after the door closed. I walked back to the dining table, looked at the documents once more, and exhaled deeply. Their actions had spoken clearly, and now I was ready to answer. The sky had already begun to darken when I finally stepped outside. The air held that sharp evening chill that settles in early spring, cold enough to make the bones complain, but not enough to stop me. I locked the door behind me, feeling the small click of the lock like a punctuation mark. Tonight wouldn't change what had already happened, but I needed to see the truth with my own eyes. No more guessing. No more giving them the benefit of the doubt. I'd spent too many years doing that. I drove slowly. My old sedan grumbled on the turns, the engine making that familiar low hum that always reminded me of Daniel's voice when he mumbled in his sleep. The drive wasn't long, but it felt like an entire lifetime was folded into each streetlight I passed. I caught myself gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary, as if the car itself might try to turn me around and take me back home. But I kept going. The restaurant appeared at the end of the block, bright, polished, the kind of place you go only when you want to be seen. Tall windows lined the front, glowing with warm light. Even the sign above the door looked expensive, each letter shining like it had something to boast about. Their car was there, both of them, parked right near the entrance, washed and gleaming. Nothing about this night was small or nothing special. I didn't park close. I pulled into a space on the far end of the lot where the lamppost flickered and the asphalt showed long cracks. It felt like the right place for someone who wasn't invited. I sat there for a moment, letting the engine idle, watching people walk inside. Dressed well, chatting, laughing. Exactly the kind of crowd Naomi always tried so hard to impress. I turned the car off. The sudden silence felt too loud. My hands trembled as I reached for the door handle, not because of fear, but because age doesn't always ask permission. Still, I made myself steady. I stepped out, straightened my coat, adjusted the collar the way Daniel used to do for me before we entered a room full of strangers. "Head up, Maggie," he'd say. "No one can look down on you unless you bow first." I whispered it to myself as I walked. Not toward the entrance. That would have been too bold, too confrontational. I wasn't here to make a scene. I wasn't here to demand a place at their table. I was here to see the truth, quietly, the way a woman my age learns to observe the world, without being noticed. Around the corner of the building was a narrow path leading toward a side patio. A perfect view of the large windows from behind a row of young trees. The bare branches gave more concealment than you'd expect. It didn't take long to find the spot. There they were. Thomas, sitting taller than he ever sat in my house. His face relaxed, unguarded, as though shedding the weight of responsibility he carried only when he stood in front of me. Naomi, smiling that polished smile of hers, the one she never wasted on me, her hand resting lightly on his wrist, a gesture she saved for moments she wanted people to notice. Across from them sat two couples I didn't know, nicely dressed, laughing, swirling wine in long-stemmed glasses. The table was set with candles, polished cutlery, food served with artistry. The kind of table you reserve weeks ahead, then brag about later. There was no empty seat, no hesitation, no space that suggested someone had been considered and then forgotten. They never meant to invite me. I watched Thomas raise his glass. I couldn't hear his words, but I saw his lips move in a short toast. Everyone at the table smiled. Everyone except Lily. She sat slightly off to the side, her expression soft but taut, her eyes drifting toward the window, searching for me. When she didn't find me, her shoulders fell the tiniest bit. She didn't look like she belonged there, not in that room filled with practiced laughter. Naomi said something to her, something sharp enough to straighten Lily's posture. I saw the girl nod stiffly, her smile brief and forced. Then she went silent, tracing her fork against the edge of her plate. A deep ache spread in my chest, but it wasn't the kind that breaks you. It was the kind that clarifies. As another round of drinks arrived, everyone leaned in, animated, comfortable, effortlessly excluding the person standing a dozen yards away. I stayed until their plates were half empty, and their laughter grew loud enough to spill through the window cracks. I watched them enjoy a night that cost more than they ever believed I'd notice. I watched them toast to themselves, to their life, to the world they built atop my shoulders. And when I finally stepped away from the window, I felt no urge to cry, no bitterness rising in my throat, just a quiet, resolute certainty. If they could celebrate without me so easily, then they would learn to live without my support just as easily. I walked back to my car, the cold air wrapping around me like a new kind of armor. Tomorrow morning, before breakfast, I would begin. And they would finally understand what it meant when someone who'd always said yes chose to say no. The house greeted me with its usual stillness when I returned, but it didn't feel empty the way it had earlier. It felt expectant, as if it knew I'd crossed some invisible threshold. I hung my coat on the hook, my fingers stiff from the cold, and stood for a moment in the hallway, listening to the quiet. Funny how silence can feel different from 1 hour to the next. Sometimes a comfort, sometimes a verdict. I made myself a cup of tea, more out of habit than desire. The kettle rattled on the stovetop, old and loyal. I'd had chances to replace it over the years, but I never did. Daniel used to joke that it would outlive me. I smiled at the memory, faintly, then carried the cup to my armchair by the window. The night outside was deep and calm, a few porch lights glowing up and down the street. I watched a neighbor walk her dog, the two of them silhouetted against the pale moonlight. Life went on, one small scene after another, unaware of what a single mother and grandmother had just realized about her own family. I leaned back, letting the warmth of the tea seep into my palms. My mind replayed the scene from the restaurant, not cruelly, not obsessively, but with the clarity of someone seeing a picture finally come into focus. The laughter, the raised glasses, the easy comfort of a night they had so confidently built without me. There had been no regret on their faces, no hesitation, not even a thought that I might feel anything at all. Maybe that hurt most, their certainty that I would simply accept it. I looked around my living room. Every corner held the shadows of my life. Photographs of Daniel, a quilt I had stitched during the winter after he died, Lily's school drawings pinned to the side of a bookshelf, a lifetime collected in quiet pieces. And yet, somehow, I had let other people convince me that this life was worth less than their convenience. I set down my cup and rubbed the bridge of my nose. My eyes stung, but tears didn't come. Not because I was trying to be strong, but because I felt something sturdier than grief settling inside me. Something older, something I had forgotten I possessed. There comes a point in every woman's life, I suppose, when she realizes she has survived too much to be treated like an afterthought. Slowly, almost ceremonially, I rose from the chair and walked to my desk. The lamp cast a warm circle of light over the surface. I pulled open the drawer and took out a small notebook, the kind I used to write grocery lists and reminders in. But tonight, it would serve a different purpose. I sat down and began writing. Not long sentences, not explanations or pleas, just names, companies, payment schedules, automatic transfers, notes about accounts Thomas had access to, notes about authorizations I had signed when my hands were weaker and my heart was softer. I didn't rush. I wrote slowly, carefully, like a woman taking inventory of her own life. I paused now and then, listening to the steady tick of the clock on the wall. It sounded louder than usual, insistent, as if marking the minutes until morning. When I finished, I closed the notebook with a deliberate, final motion. I placed it neatly beside the bank folder on the desk. Tomorrow, before breakfast, I would go. I would sit with the bank manager, look him in the eyes, and say the words I had never allowed myself to even imagine. Cancel everything. Freeze the accounts. Revoke the authorization. I rested my hand on the notebook for a moment. My fingers felt steady. My breath steady. My heartbeat, too. Outside, the neighbor's porch light switched off, plunging the street into deeper quiet. I turned off my own lamp, leaving only the small hallway light glowing. The house felt gentler now, as though approving of the decision I had finally reached. I walked to my bedroom, my steps slow but firm. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel old. I simply felt sure. Tomorrow, they would learn who I still was. And tonight, I allowed myself the rare comfort of going to bed without doubt. Morning arrived earlier than I expected. I woke before the alarm, before the sun fully settled over the rooftops, with that strange, clear-headed feeling I'd almost forgotten I could have. Usually, the first minutes of my day were slow, joints protesting, mind foggy, body hesitant. But not today. Today, I rose with purpose. I brewed tea but didn't linger over it. I drank half a cup while standing at the counter, the way I used to on workdays decades ago, when Daniel and I both rushed out the door before dawn. The memory steadied me. I rinsed the cup, put on my coat, and tucked my notebook, the one filled with last night's careful lists, into my bag. The bank opened at 8. I was parked outside at 7:45. There were only 2 other cars in the lot. A young couple sat in one of them arguing quietly. In the other, a man in a suit studied a stack of papers on his steering wheel. I didn't linger on them. I had enough of my own life to face today. When the doors unlocked, a young teller greeted me with that polite smile people give older women, gentle, practiced, faintly patronizing. "Good morning," she said. "How can we help you today?" "I'd like to speak with the branch manager," I replied. "Is it about an existing account?" "Yes," I said. "One that needs immediate attention." Something in my tone must have carried weight, because she nodded quickly and gestured for me to sit. Minutes later, a man in his 50s with gray hair at his temples stepped out of an office. "Mrs. Holding, please come in." His office smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and coffee, the kind that had been sitting on a warmer too long. He shook my hand, firm but not forceful, then waited for me to settle into the chair across from him. "How can I assist you?" he asked. I opened my notebook, flattening the pages with steady hands. "I need to revoke all financial authorizations previously given to my son," I said, effective immediately. The manager straightened slightly, respectful now. "Of course, we can do that. May I ask if there has been any issue with misuse of funds?" "No," I said. "The issue is a long habit of allowing things I should not allow." He nodded, understanding more than the surface of those words. "And beyond revoking authorization? I want to freeze the secondary accounts," I continued, flipping to another page. "Stop all automatic transfers to his household, mortgage contributions, insurance payments, the utilities I've been covering, every recurring charge connected to their address, all of them." He scanned the list, eyebrows lifting in quiet surprise. "These are quite a lot of payments. I'm aware. May I ask," he said gently, "if you'd like us to notify your son of the changes?" "No." My voice was quiet, but unshakable. "If he discovers it, let him discover it on his own." The manager didn't question me. Instead, he turned to his computer, typing steadily. I watched his fingers move across the keyboard, each stroke like a small hammer tapping away the years I'd spent holding everyone else up. "Some of these transfers can be canceled immediately," he said. "Others will require signatures on new forms. Are you prepared to sign today?" "I came to sign," I replied. He printed a stack of documents, thick, official, precise. I read each one carefully. Not because I doubted what I wanted, but because for the first time in years, I was doing something entirely for myself. I signed slowly, deliberately, letting each stroke of the pen anchor the new boundaries I was drawing. When I finished, he slid the last paper back toward me. "There's one more question, Mrs. Holding. Do you want to maintain your current accounts as they are? Or would you like to move some funds into a protected trust?" My hand paused. A protected trust. A place where no one, no matter how entitled they felt, could reach. I thought of Lily. Her quiet presence at my table yesterday, her concern, her loyalty, her heart. A future could be safeguarded there. A future that wouldn't be drained by people who saw me as nothing more than a well that never ran dry. Yes, I said softly. I'd like to establish a trust, and I'd like it in my granddaughter's name. His smile this time was different, real. A good decision, Mrs. Holding. When the paperwork was complete and my bag was zipped shut, I rose from the chair feeling lighter, though not in the careless way youth feels light. More like a weight had been lifted that I'd forgotten I was carrying. As I stepped out of the office, the manager walked me to the door. "If you need anything else," he said, "you come straight to me." I nodded. Outside, the morning sun had fully risen, warm on my face. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the air. For the first time in many years, I felt something simple and clean. I hadn't lost a family. I'd finally reclaimed myself. I didn't drive straight home after the bank, not because I felt unsure, no, that part of me was steady now, but because there was one more place I needed to go, while the certainty was still warm in my chest. The attorney's office was only a few minutes away, tucked between a bakery and a small insurance agency. I'd passed it 100 times without a second thought. Today, it felt like stepping into a different chapter of my life. Inside, the waiting room smelled faintly of paper and old carpet. A young receptionist looked up with that polite, placid expression reserved for the elderly. "Good morning? Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said, placing my bag on the counter. "But I need to speak with Mr. Collins. It's regarding my estate and financial protections." That word, estate, seemed to shift her posture a little. Money has a way of turning heads, even politely. Let me see if he's available. 5 minutes later, I was sitting across from Henry Collins, my attorney for nearly 15 years. He'd handled Daniel's estate, helped me settle the cabin sale, drafted the authorization forms I'd now undone. His hair was grayer than last time. He looked at me with mild surprise. "Margaret, you're not on my schedule today. What brings you in?" I opened my notebook, just as I had at the bank. "I need to amend my will," I said calmly, "and set up an irrevocable trust. My granddaughter Lily will be the beneficiary." He blinked once, slowly. "That's quite a change." "It's been overdue," I replied. He leaned back, studying me the way people study quiet lakes, before realizing how deep they go. "Does your son know you're making these adjustments?" "No," I said, "and I don't intend to discuss them with him." Something about that made him nod with genuine respect, not legal obligation. He opened a folder and pulled out the necessary forms. "Tell me exactly what you want protected." "All of it," I said. "Every remaining savings account, the house, the pension fund, and I want explicit instructions preventing any family member other than Lily from contesting the trust." He paused mid-note. "That's firm language." "I've spent too many years being flexible," I said quietly. "It's time I learned how to hold things together for myself, not for everyone else." We spent nearly an hour reviewing details: succession, trusteeship, medical directives, property control. He asked careful questions. I gave careful answers. I didn't rush. Age teaches patience, but hurt teaches precision. When we reached the final section, Collins folded his hands. "Margaret, do you want to include any provision for your son? Even a symbolic one?" I looked at my own reflection in the dark sheen of his desk. A woman who had built a family, funded a life, carried everyone else's storms. "No," I said. "Kindness should not be repaid with entitlement." He didn't argue. He simply handed me the pen. I signed the documents with the steadiness of someone laying a foundation, each stroke of ink carving out a boundary that should have existed long ago. When we were finished, He gathered the papers neatly. "These protections go into effect immediately," he said. "And Margaret, if you need support or if anyone pressures you, call me." "I won't need to," I answered. "Not this time." When I stepped outside, a soft breeze brushed against my coat, almost like Daniel placing a hand on my shoulder. The sky was clear, the kind of blue that makes everything feel sharper. I walked to my car with slow, deliberate steps. I didn't feel triumphant. That's not what this was. I felt restored, like someone who had finally returned to herself after being gone for far too long. The first sign came earlier than I expected. I had barely set my bag down on the hallway table when my phone buzzed twice in rapid succession, sharp little vibrations that seemed almost nervous. I didn't rush to check it. I hung up my coat, smoothed the sleeve, and walked into the kitchen as calmly as if it were any other afternoon. Only then did I look at the screen. 2 messages from Thomas, followed by 3 from Naomi. Then 1 from an unknown number that I suspected belonged to the mortgage company. I didn't open a single one. Instead, I made tea, the 3rd cup of the day, but the first one I truly enjoyed. The air smelled of bergamot and warm porcelain. Outside, the wind rattled the window slightly, making the branches tap the glass like impatient fingers. Fitting, I thought. When the phone vibrated again, this time with a call, I let it ring, then ring again, and again. Eventually, the ringing turned into silence, replaced by a voicemail alert. I didn't check that either. I carried my tea to the living room and sat down in my chair, feeling a sense of quiet stretch through my chest. Not peace, exactly. More like the space that appears when a long, clenched muscle finally releases. I had spent years bracing myself against their demands. Now I simply breathed. It took 20 minutes before the predictable shift happened. Panic. Naomi's messages changed from casual to clipped. "Is something wrong with the card?" "My payment didn't go through. Can you check your account?" "I'm sure it's just a glitch." "Call me." Then Thomas. "Mom, the utilities didn't clear." The mortgage bounced. "Did you touch something?" "Call me now." Their concern wasn't about me. It never had been. They weren't wondering if I was ill or in trouble. They were wondering why their comfortable life, built on the foundation of my quiet support, had suddenly cracked. I took another sip of tea. By the time the sun dipped low, the tone of the messages had shifted again. Panic had its limits. Irritation moved quicker. "Mom, what did you do?" "We need you to respond." "This is serious." I turned the phone face down. Somewhere far away, 3 miles to be exact, my son was pacing in his living room, phone pressed to his ear, confused and irritated that the world was no longer bending quietly around him. I imagined Naomi with her crossed arms and sharp voice, demanding explanations she felt entitled to. I set my cup aside and folded my hands in my lap. The room glowed with the last of the golden evening light, warming the old photographs on the wall. Daniel's smile seemed a little less faint tonight. When the landline rang, its old-fashioned urgency breaking through the calm, I didn't move. After 4 rings, the machine picked up with my recorded greeting, my voice sounding gentler than I felt. I heard Naomi's voice spill through the speaker, shrill with frustration. "Margaret, it's Naomi. We're having issues with the accounts. We need to know what's going on. Thomas thinks maybe there was a bank error, but I told him that's unlikely. Please call back. Immediately. Immediately." As if the word still held power here. I slowly exhaled. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the familiar pull, guilt, obligation, that aching instinct to soothe. There was nothing left in me that wanted to jump up and fix their discomfort. When the phone rang again, Thomas this time, I let the machine answer. "Mom," he said, struggling to sound calm but failing. "Listen, we need to sort this out. The payments aren't processing. Just call me. Please." I closed my eyes. That last word, please, wasn't tenderness. It was fear dressed weakly as politeness. As the machine beeped again and the room fell silent, I felt something subtle shift inside me. A small, steady flame that had been smothered for years now glowed with quiet certainty. They weren't in control anymore. They didn't know it yet. But the balance of our lives had changed. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't the one who felt powerless. It was nearly dusk when I finally heard the soft, hesitant knock at the door. Not the loud, hurried pounding that Thomas used when he was frustrated, and not the sharp, rhythmic tapping Naomi favored. This knock was gentle, almost apologetic. I didn't need to look to know it was Lily. I opened the door to her worried face, her cheeks pink from the cold, her eyes searching mine before she even stepped inside. "Grandma," she breathed. "I came as soon as I could." I moved aside to let her in. "Come, dear. You must be freezing." She set her bag on the small bench by the coat rack, her movements restless. "Dad's been calling nonstop. Mom, too. They're driving me crazy. They said something's wrong with the accounts, that none of the payments are going through." I walked to the kitchen, putting on water for tea. Lily followed, hovering near the table with her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Grandma," she said quietly, Did you do something?" There was no accusation in her voice, only concern, only care. I turned to face her fully. "Yes," I said simply. "I did." She didn't react with shock. Instead, she released a slow breath, as if she had suspected the answer but needed to hear it from me. "Can you tell me what happened?" she asked. I motioned for her to sit. The kettle began its soft rumble behind me. "Your father and Naomi have been depending on my finances for years," I began, long after it stopped being help and became expectation. Lily nodded slowly. She didn't interrupt. "I've covered bills, debts, their mortgage, their insurance, quietly, consistently." My voice didn't shake. "And last night, when they went out to celebrate without me, when they made sure I wouldn't know." I paused. I realized I had become something convenient, not someone loved. Lily swallowed hard. "I knew. I mean, I didn't know the details, but I knew something wasn't right." She twisted her fingers together. "I told them it wasn't fair you weren't invited. Mom snapped at me. Dad ignored me. I felt sick all night." I placed a hand over hers. "You're not responsible for their choices." She blinked rapidly, eyes shining with something between anger and sadness. "They're saying the bank froze everything, that they can't access the savings, that automatic payments were canceled. They think it's a mistake." "It wasn't," I said calmly. "I had the authorizations revoked, and I moved what remains into a trust." I gave her a soft, steady look. "In your name." Her breath stopped. Just stopped. She stared at me, stunned, as if the words were too large to take in. "Grandma, what? No, I can't. Why would you?" "Because you," I said gently, "have never treated me like a burden. You've shown me respect, kindness, honesty. You come to see me without wanting anything." I squeezed her fingers. "I want my life's work to go to someone who understands its weight." Her eyes brimmed with tears. Not selfish tears, not greedy ones, but the kind that come when someone feels seen. "Grandma," she whispered, voice breaking, "I don't want your money. I just want you." I felt something warm unfurl inside me, something that had been dormant since Daniel died. "It's not about the money," I said softly. "It's about choosing who values me, who values themselves. She wiped at her cheek. Dad's going to be furious when he finds out. I know, I said, but his reaction is his responsibility, not mine. The kettle whistled softly behind me. I stood, poured us both tea, and returned to the table. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The quiet between us wasn't heavy. It was full. After a long pause, Lily said, "Do you want me to stay? I don't want you to go through this alone." I reached across the table, brushing a stray hair from her face. "Oh, my dear. I've spent a lifetime alone in rooms full of people. Tonight, I feel anything but alone." Her hand closed over mine again, warm and sure. Outside, the streetlights flickered on one by one. Inside, for the first time in many years, I felt safe. Not because someone was protecting me, but because I had finally learned to protect myself. Thomas showed up the next afternoon without calling first. I recognized the sound of his car before I even saw it. Fast, abrupt, the way he used to pull into the driveway when he was a teenager and didn't want me to know he'd missed curfew. Some habits stick, even when the reasons behind them change. I had just finished folding a load of towels when I heard his footsteps on the porch. Heavy, determined. A man preparing for confrontation, not conversation. The knock came hard. 3 quick strikes that rattled the door. Not a request, an announcement. I opened it slowly. "Mom," he said, breath tight, jaw clenched. No hello. No pause to look at me. He brushed past before I could offer to let him in, as though the house still belonged to his convenience. I closed the door gently. "Would you like some tea?" "No," he snapped, turning toward me. "I want an explanation." I studied him for a moment. The flush in his cheeks. The restless movement in his hands. The way he avoided my eyes unless he wanted something. "What happened to the accounts?" he demanded. The mortgage bounced. The insurance payment didn't go through. Even the grocery card. Everything's frozen. "I know," I said simply. "You know?" His voice jumped, sharp and incredulous. "Mom, our entire financial setup is falling apart." "It was never your setup," I replied quietly. "It was mine." That stunned him long enough for a brief silence to settle between us. He blinked, then pressed a hand to his forehead, as if I were speaking nonsense. "Why would you do this?" he asked. But it wasn't a real question. It was an accusation dressed in fear. "Because," I said, "I no longer consent to funding a life I'm not included in." His mouth opened, closed. He stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. "Is this about last night? Is that what this is?" I met his eyes then, and he flinched. Not because I was angry, but because I wasn't. "This is about many nights," I said, "and many years." Last night only made the picture clear. He shoved his hands into his pockets. "You should have talked to me before doing something this drastic." "I've talked," I said. "You just never listened." "That's not fair," he muttered. "No," I corrected softly. "What wasn't fair was being treated like an obligation you hoped would quietly disappear." His jaw tightened. "Mom, we counted on that money." "I know," I replied. "You counted on it so much you stopped seeing it as help. You treated it as income, as entitlement." His voice grew louder. "Do you have any idea what position this puts us in?" I held his stare. "Do you have any idea what position you put me in? Being the bank, the safety net, the one who paid for everything while you left me out of the moments you celebrated?" He looked away then, toward the window, toward anything but the truth. "This is extreme," he said finally, almost pleading. "We can fix this. Just reverse whatever you did." "No, Thomas." He froze. It was the first time in his adult life I'd told him no without apology. "I've already met with the bank," I continued, "and with my attorney." His face went pale. "Attorney? Mom, what did you sign?" "Protections," I said. "For myself, for my home, and a trust for Lily." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. "For Lily?" he repeated. "Why her and not—" "Because she has never taken from me," I said gently. "And because she never made me feel small." He stepped back as if the air had pushed him. His voice dropped to a low, trembling anger. "So you're choosing her over your own son?" I shook my head. "I'm choosing respect. If you wanted to be chosen, you should have offered the same." For the first time in years, he didn't have an immediate argument. He looked around the room, at the photos on the wall, at the furniture he'd always assumed would one day be his. It was only then he realized none of it belonged to him anymore. "Mom," he said, softer now, almost boyish, "what am I supposed to tell Naomi?" "The truth," I said. "Something both of you have avoided for a long time." He swallowed, jaw trembling with a mix of fear and anger. "I can't believe you're doing this." "I can," I replied, "because it's the first thing I've done for myself in decades." He stared at me one more moment, searching for the old softness he used to rely on. But I wasn't giving it back. Without another word, he turned and walked out. The door closed behind him with a dull thud. Not the sound of something ending, but the sound of something finally beginning. Naomi arrived an hour later, as if the world had appointed her the final authority on all things that belonged to everyone but herself. I heard her before I saw her. Her quick, clipped steps on the walkway, each one carrying indignation like a shield. She didn't knock gently. She pounded, sharp and rhythmic, the way people knock when they think politeness is beneath them. I opened the door and she swept inside without waiting. Her perfume hit the air first, something expensive, floral, heavy. It always lingered longer than her kindness ever had. "Margaret," she said, pulling off her gloves, her voice already tight. "We need to talk." "Then talk," I replied calmly. She blinked, surprised by the lack of apology, of welcome, of softness. I gestured toward the living room, and she walked ahead, her heels clicking like reprimands against the hardwood floor. She stood, not sat, crossing her arms over her chest. "What on earth have you done?" she demanded. I folded my hands gently. "I've made some changes." "Changes?" she repeated, incredulous. "Thomas is beside himself. Our accounts are frozen, the mortgage bounced, the insurance won't process." "Do you understand how serious this is?" I met her stare evenly. "Do you?" Her jaw clenched. She took a breath as if steadying herself before a performance. "You put our entire family in jeopardy," she said. "For what? Because you weren't invited to one dinner?" The words slid off her tongue effortlessly, as if the insult had been rehearsed. I watched her carefully, every flicker of irritation, every practiced expression of a woman convinced she has the moral high ground. "This isn't about a dinner," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Oh, don't," she snapped. "Don't turn this into some grand moral lesson. You're overreacting." "I see," I murmured. "And excluding me from your celebration wasn't an overreaction." Naomi's eyes flashed. "It wasn't personal. Those events aren't appropriate for someone your age. You get tired easily. You get confused." "I am neither tired nor confused," I interrupted. "Not today." She shifted her weight, thrown off for a moment. "Thomas works hard. We work hard. We depend on that support to keep things running. You know that." "Yes," I said. You depend on it so much you forgot it was mine." She scoffed loudly. "This is unbelievable. After everything we've done for you. For me?" I raised an eyebrow. "Tell me, Naomi, what exactly have you done for me?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her eyes darted around the room as if searching for something. A gracious memory, perhaps, but found none. "We included you in our lives," she insisted weakly. "Included me?" I repeated. "You kept me at the edges. You came here when money was tight, when things needed fixing, when bills piled up. Love was never part of the visit." "That's not fair," she snapped. "It's honest," I said. She exhaled sharply, frustration spilling out of her in waves. "Well, you can't just turn off all support. We have obligations. We have a household, children, expenses. This affects more than just you." "I know," I said. "And perhaps it's time you two learned to carry your own weight." Her eyes widened, as if the very idea was offensive. "You're punishing us." "No," I corrected. "I am protecting myself." "And the trust?" she hissed. "For Lily? You think that's appropriate?" "Yes," I said simply. "She has shown me respect. She has shown me compassion. She has never treated me as a means to an end." Naomi let out an incredulous laugh, sharp and bitter. "So that's it? She wins a prize for being sweet to Grandma?" "No," I replied. "She receives what I choose to give. The same choice I gave you, again and again, and which you never valued." Her voice dropped to a low, threatening tone. "Thomas won't forgive you for this." "I'm not asking for forgiveness," I said. "I'm asking for nothing." She stared at me, truly stared, as if seeing me for the first time. Not as an elderly woman she could manage, but as someone who had drawn a line she could not cross. Finally, she grabbed her gloves and turned sharply toward the door. "I hope you know what you're doing," she said, her voice icy. "I do," I said softly. And for once, she had no clever retort. Just the sound of her heels, clicking away from a house that no longer served her, and a door closing firmly behind her. The house was quiet after Naomi left, but not the heavy kind of quiet. This one felt earned. I sat for a while, letting the stillness settle, feeling it wrap around me like something warm. But it didn't last long. Conflict has a way of echoing through a family, and mine was no exception. By early evening, my phone buzzed again. Not with demands this time, but with something unexpected. A message from Lily. "Grandma, things are bad here. Can I come over?" I told her yes. 15 minutes later, she slipped through the front door, her face pale and tight around the eyes. She didn't bother with her coat. She just came straight to me. "They're fighting," she whispered, voice unsteady. "Really fighting." I guided her into the living room. "Sit, dear. Breathe." She sat on the edge of the sofa, hands twisted together. "Dad's yelling at Mom. Mom's yelling back. They're blaming each other for everything. I've never seen them like this." I nodded slowly. Pressure does that. When dependence breaks, the cracks show. Lily swallowed hard. "Mom said you've ruined their life. Dad said he can't believe you'd do this to him." I tried to say something, tried to make them understand, but they wouldn't listen. "They're not ready to hear," I said gently. "People rarely are, when a truth threatens the world they built." She lifted her eyes to mine. "Dad kept saying he deserved more time, that you should have waited, that you blindsided him." I exhaled calmly. "Your father has lived many years assuming my support was endless. To him, any boundary feels like betrayal." Lily's voice dropped. "He said you owe him." That hurt. Not in the sharp way Naomi's words always had, but in the deep, tired way a mother feels when she realizes her child has grown into a stranger she never meant to raise. I owe him love, I said softly. But love is not the same as sacrifice. Lily leaned forward, her eyes shining. Grandma, I don't want them to drag you back into anything. I don't want them to twist this into guilt. They won't, I assured her. Not anymore. She hesitated, then asked the question that had clearly been pressing on her chest. Are you okay? I reached out, taking her hand. For the first time in a long while, yes. She closed her eyes, relief passing over her features. I just don't understand how they let it come to this. They didn't let it, I corrected softly. They created it. Bit by bit, choice by choice. And now they have to stand in what they built. Lily sighed, heavy and sad. I tried to talk to Dad. I told him he couldn't expect you to pay for everything forever. He said I didn't understand the responsibilities of adulthood. That made me smile, not from humor, but from the bitter irony. Adulthood, I said, isn't measured by bills. It's measured by how we treat the people who raised us. She nodded slowly, absorbing that. After a moment, she leaned her head on my shoulder, a gesture so simple, yet something inside me settled with it, as if all the scattered pieces of my heart found their place again. They're going to keep arguing, she murmured. I didn't want to be there. You're safe here, I said. And she was. Not because I protected her with money or rules, but because this house, my life, still carried a kind of dignity they couldn't touch. Outside, the evening deepened, shadows stretching long across the yard. Inside, there was only softness, resolve, and the quiet understanding that some bonds grow stronger when others fall away. Lily stayed until the voices in her parents' house would have faded into exhaustion. When she finally left, she hugged me tightly, whispering, I'm proud of you, Grandma. And long after the door closed, her words remained, a gentle reminder that strength, once reclaimed, doesn't need to shout. The next morning, the house felt lighter. Not in the dramatic way people describe after a revelation. No, it was quieter than that. Subtle. A kind of stillness that settles when something long overdue finally shifts into place. I woke without the usual heaviness in my chest, without the quiet dread of another day spent tiptoeing around other people's expectations. I made breakfast, simple toast, a soft egg, tea, and ate at the table instead of standing by the counter. It felt almost luxurious, sitting in my own kitchen as if I belonged in it. Funny how easily we give up small comforts when we've spent years giving up larger ones. After I cleaned up, I went to the hallway closet and pulled out the small toolbox Daniel left behind. I ran my fingers over the metal handle, remembering how he used to hum when he fixed things around the house. Nothing is too broken, he'd say. Just needs the right hands. My home wasn't broken, but it had been neglected. Neglected because I had placed my own needs last for so long, I nearly forgot they existed. So I started with something simple, the loose cabinet hinge in the kitchen. It had bothered me for years, swinging too wide, clicking faintly whenever I opened it. Thomas always promised he'd fix it next time, but the next time never came. I tightened the screws myself. It took 2 minutes. 2 minutes for something I'd waited years for someone else to do. I moved through the house at my own pace, dusting shelves, polishing frames, wiping down the windows. Not because I needed the place spotless, but because it felt good to take care of something that was truly mine. My hands moved slowly, intentionally, touching objects I'd ignored for too long. The small ceramic vase Daniel bought me at a roadside market. The quilt I'd stitched one winter when the power went out. the worn rug by the front door with its faded pattern of blue and gold. Around noon, I stepped outside. The sun was mild, warming the porch boards, and the neighborhood carried its usual daytime quiet. I took a walk, a slow one, steady, unhurried, down the street and back. People greeted me with small smiles, unaware of the quiet transformation inside my chest. I returned home with a bag of fresh apples and a new pair of gloves I found on sale. I hadn't bought anything for myself in months, maybe years. Back inside, I placed the apples in a bowl and tried on the gloves again, admiring how soft they felt. Small joys, the kind women often deny themselves because there's always someone else who needs something first. Later, I opened the windows to let in fresh air. Curtains swayed gently, sunlight washed over the floor, and for the first time in a long while, my home felt alive, like a place meant for living, not waiting. I sat on the porch in the late afternoon, wrapped in a light sweater, watching the street as if seeing it new. The world looked no different, but I did. Or maybe I finally allowed myself to. The phone stayed silent most of the day. No calls from Thomas, no messages from Naomi. Maybe they were still arguing. Maybe they were planning their next approach. But that was their storm, not mine. For once, the distance felt like protection, not loss. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky with that soft pink glow Daniel used to love, I breathed in deeply. The air smelled faintly of lilac from a neighbor's yard. Peaceful, uncomplicated. This was my life, my home, my time. And for the first evening in many years, I didn't feel like I was waiting to be included in someone else's world. I was living in my own. By Sunday morning, the storm had quieted. Not resolved. Storms like that never resolve neatly. But it had burned through enough to leave only the inevitable silence afterward. I woke to soft light, pushing through the curtains, the kind that makes everything look gentler than it is. My joints ached a little, but even that felt familiar, grounding, a reminder that I was still here, still choosing. I made tea and took it out to the porch, settling into the old wooden chair Daniel once repaired for me. The boards beneath my feet were warm from yesterday's sun. The air carried that early morning coolness I'd always liked. A sparrow hopped along the railing, unbothered by my presence. Life continued, simple and steady. My phone buzzed once. A message from Thomas. Short, tight, asking to talk when you're ready. I didn't feel anger, only clarity. Talking wouldn't change what needed to stay changed. I set the phone face down on the small table beside me and wrapped both hands around my cup. The world was quiet in a way my heart hadn't felt in years. No demands. No guilt tugging at me. No invisible obligation hanging above my head. Just breath and warmth and the faint rustle of leaves. It struck me then how easy it is to lose yourself when your life becomes a long list of what you're needed for, instead of who you are. How easily love twists into debt when boundaries blur. How long a woman can endure being unseen before she finally decides she has had enough. And how powerful it feels when she does. Around noon, Lily arrived with a small bag of pastries from the bakery downtown. She sat beside me on the porch, her feet tucked beneath her, her presence soft and familiar. She didn't mention the trust. She didn't mention her parents' anger. She didn't mention anything heavy. Instead, she talked about her classes, about a book she was reading, about a recipe she wanted to try. Life, in its simple forms. At one point, she turned to me and said, "Grandma, you seem lighter." "I am," I replied. "Finally." She rested her head on my shoulder. We watched the neighborhood in comfortable silence. The neighbor's dog trotting after a squirrel. A child riding a bike too small for him. The breeze carrying the smell of someone's morning toast. I thought of the woman I'd been for so long. Quiet, accommodating, shrinking bit by bit to fit into the corners others left for her. And I thought of the woman sitting here now, steady and unafraid. I wasn't seeking revenge. I wasn't punishing anyone. I was reclaiming what so many women lose: my dignity, my voice, my right to choose myself. When the sun rose higher and the day grew warmer, I closed my eyes and whispered something I had not said in years. Not a plea, not a question, but a simple truth meant for Daniel, for myself, for the quiet morning air. I finally came back to my life. And this time, I intended to stay. If this story resonated with you, even a little, stay with me. There are more truths to tell, more voices to honor, more women to remind that their strength is never gone.